Imagine an arena where executions aren't just punishments, they're theater, where a man isn't simply killed but is forced to play a character from mythology, his scripted death made horrifically real for a roaring crowd. This wasn't a scene from a movie. This was entertainment in Emperor Nero's Rome. For him, cruelty wasn't just a tool of power. It was an art form, and the Roman arena was his personal canvas. The name Nero has become shorthand for tyranny and a special kind of madness that shocked even the hardened citizens of ancient Rome. He was the emperor who murdered his own mother, reportedly kicked his pregnant wife to death, and, as the legend goes, played music while his city burned. But Nero wasn't just a brute, he was a showman. He didn't just eliminate his enemies, he turned their deaths into elaborate, horrifying spectacles. This is the story of how one of history's most infamous rulers made horror into an art and turned an empire into his personal theater of cruelty. To understand the monster, you have to meet the boy. Born Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus in 37 AD, the future emperor was a direct descendant of Augustus himself. But his early life was completely dominated by the ruthless ambition of his mother, Agrippina the Younger. She was a master of political games, so cunning that she managed to marry the sitting emperor, her own uncle, Claudius, and convince him to adopt her son, putting him in line for the throne ahead of Claudius's own boy, Britannicus. When Claudius died in 54 AD, very likely poisoned by Agrippina, the path was clear. At just 16 years old, Nero became the most powerful man in the world. In the beginning, things looked promising. Guided by his famous tutor, the philosopher Seneca, Nero's early reign was stable. He passed popular reforms and seemed genuinely interested in culture and the arts. For a brief moment, it looked like Rome might be heading for a new golden age. But behind the scenes, a power struggle was brewing. Agrippina put her son on the throne, and she fully expected to rule through him. Nero had other ideas. He wanted to be his own man, and the first casualty of that desire was his 14-year-old stepbrother, Britannicus. During a palace dinner, Britannicus was served poisoned wine and died in agony in front of the entire court. It was a chilling announcement that this young, hopeful emperor was capable of cold-blooded murder. It was the first real step in his descent into madness, and he would drag all of Rome down with him. Here's the thing about Nero. He never really wanted to be an emperor. He saw himself as an artist, a poet, a musician, a singer, and a chariot racer. For a Roman ruler, this was a massive scandal. The elites looked down on performers as being no better than slaves, but Nero didn't care. He shocked the Senate by performing on public stages and racing his own chariots. But his artistic ambition had a much darker side. He didn't just want applause, he wanted to direct the world, to bend reality to fit his own creative vision. For Nero, power was the ultimate artistic tool. It let him do more than just write a tragedy. It let him stage one with real people and real suffering. His cruelty wasn't just political. It was theatrical. He wasn't just getting rid of rivals. He was casting them in a grand, bloody performance of his own design. This twisted fusion of art and power bled into his personal life. He grew bored of his first wife, Octavia, so he had her banished and executed on trumped-up charges. He then married his mistress, Poppaea Sabina. The historian Tacitus reports that years later, during an argument, he kicked her while she was pregnant, killing her. The lines were blurring. The emperor's stage was no longer just the theater. It was becoming the palace, the Senate, and soon, the entire city of Rome. In the summer of 64 AD, disaster struck. A fire broke out near the Circus Maximus and raged for over a week, destroying huge parts of the city. Rumors immediately started swirling that Nero himself had started it to clear land for a gigantic new palace, his Golden House. The historian Tacitus tells us that to get rid of this rumor, Nero needed a scapegoat. He found one in a small, misunderstood religious group known as the Christians. They were already distrusted for refusing to worship the Roman gods. Nero seized on this, blamed them for the fire, and unleashed a wave of persecution so horrific it shocked even the desensitized Roman public. But this wasn't just a series of executions, it was a show. Nero turned punishment into a ghoulish spectacle. According to Tacitus, some Christians were dressed in animal skins and torn apart by dogs. Others were nailed to crosses. But Nero's most infamous invention was allegedly reserved for his private garden parties. He had Christians coated in pitch, tied to poles, and set on fire. They became human torches, their burning bodies lighting up the night as the emperor mingled with guests, sometimes even driving his chariot among them. This wasn't justice, it was a macabre performance. The emperor, who supposedly fiddled while Rome burned, was now using the screams of his victims as the soundtrack for his parties. Nero's artistic cruelty hit its peak in the arena. Public executions were already a brutal part of Roman life, but Nero took them to a whole new level. Mythical reenactments. He didn't just kill prisoners, he forced them to act out scenes from mythology, where the story's violent end became their own. Ancient writers describe some truly grotesque plays. A condemned man might be costumed as Orpheus, given a lyre, and placed in the arena, only to be mauled to death by wild bears. Another story tells of a prisoner dressed as Icarus, who was supposedly thrown from the top of the amphitheater to his death. These weren't just killings, they were twisted artistic statements, turning cultural myths into live-action horror. The accounts claim women were forced into terrible roles as well. Some stories, likely exaggerated by satirical poets, even suggested women were made to reenact the myth of Pasiphae, who was cursed to mate with a bull. He also made use of the tunica molesta, a shirt soaked in a flammable substance. A victim would be forced to wear it and then set ablaze. For Nero, the arena was his stage, and human bodies were his props. He was the director, producer, and star of his own horror show, and all of Rome was his captive audience. An empire can only put up with that kind of madness for so long. Nero's insane spending, funded by seizing senators' property and raiding temples, made him powerful enemies. His bizarre behavior and public performances horrified the military and the elite. In 65 AD, a major plot against him was discovered, which led to a brutal purge. Even his old tutor, Seneca, was forced to commit suicide. The final straw came in 68 AD. The governor of Gaul rebelled, and he was quickly supported by the governor of Spain. The legions started to desert Nero. The emperor, who had once laughed off the news, suddenly found himself totally alone. The Senate, sensing his weakness, finally acted. They declared him a public enemy and sentenced him to be beaten to death. Abandoned by his guards, Nero fled the city. Cornered in a villa and terrified, the man who had designed so many elaborate deaths couldn't bring himself to end his own life. Pacing back and forth, he kept muttering what would become his famous last words. Qualis artifex pereo? What an artist dies in me. Finally, as enemy horsemen approached, he had his private secretary help him drive a dagger into his throat. The artist's final performance was over. His death ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty and plunged Rome into a chaotic civil war known as the Year of the Four Emperors. Nero's reign is a terrifying look at what happens when absolute power meets a narcissist who sees people not as humans, but as props for his own twisted glory. If you want to uncover more of history's darkest chapters, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories like this. History is full of cruel rulers, but few mixed sadism with showmanship quite like Nero. He was more than a tyrant. He was a deranged artist who used the power of an empire to stage his bloody fantasies. It's true that most of what we know was written by his enemies, who may have exaggerated his crimes. But the stories they told paint a chilling picture of a man who truly believed cruelty could be art. His final words, "What an artist dies in me," weren't just vanity. In his mind, it was the simple truth, the lament of a director whose greatest, most terrible show had finally come to an end.